On the Healthy Looks Great on You podcast, we often talk about longevity and lifespan. But when we talk about lifespan, we also talk about health span because you want your health to last as long as your life. One thing we often don't talk about, though, is wealth span. It's important that your money lasts as well.
Healthy isn't just what you do, it's who you become. I'm Dr. Vickie, and this is Healthy Looks Great on You, a lifestyle medicine podcast to help you reclaim your energy, your focus, and your well-being. Life tested, doctor approved.
My special guest today is Matt Buller. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Vickie. Glad to be here.
All right, well, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. I've been a financial advisor for 12 years. I'm a second-gen financial advisor. I worked with my dad for over a decade. Our practice goes back almost 40 years. And I'm based in Central Illinois. I work for Benjamin F. Edwards, which is a St. Louis-based national broker-dealer. And my focus has been walking alongside of families and individuals. Now we've reached into the fourth generation of many families. And so walking alongside of them through really just the focus of both passing down wealth, but also passing down a sense of purpose along the way. So a lot of my focus is on the individual and just gracefully going through the different phases of life and how finances intersects with, every other aspect of life.
It absolutely does. I had a friend who was a banker who used to say people care more about their money than they do their health.
No doubt. It's hard to separate the two sometimes.
Well, and both are important because it takes money to live. Whether people like it or not, it takes money to live. And I think as people approach retirement age, or if they start encountering health problems, then that kind of comes to the forefront. And I've experienced that personally when my career ended literally in a moment. And suddenly the career that I thought I was going to have for the rest of my life, I didn't. And so I think planning is important, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But then also, what would you say to the person who thinks, here I am at retirement, do I have enough to meet my needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think family dynamics and health and finances, all of that is interconnected. And so one of the things that we often come back to is frameworks of what you can do. You mentioned healthspan and wealthspan. It's not just a finance conversation. It's also about how you can live well over time. We also hear that healthspan concept. It's not just how we live, but it's also how well we live. I think there's a financial parallel to that. And in many ways, health and wealth are kind of built the same way, right? Through three key themes that I'll often talk about with my clients is habits, time, and decisions. Habits are what you do consistently. Time is the compounding effect of small choices, and decisions are the things that you make when you're under stress. And so oftentimes, I quote my dad often used to say that you can't manage a decision that you haven't made. And so usually where we find a lot of the alleviated stress, maybe not gone, because stress is rarely gone in those scenarios, but when you're executing something that you've already decided ahead of time, that's where am I going to live? Who am I going to spend time with? How am I going to age gracefully? Or does this house meet my needs? If we have a major health event, where's the money going to come from? Things like that. Those are the things that when you have a plan in place, that tends to help alleviate some of that immediate stress. And that's something that we focus a lot on.
There really are so many parallels between healthy habits and building wealth habits and the consequences of doing that well or not doing that well. So you mentioned purpose. How would you see that tying in to both wealth and health?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's how you frame money or how you view money in the first place. Money is a tool, but it's not the goal. How you think about money as a tool to support your lifestyle and goals is going to define how you approach it through every phase of life. The best way that I could describe this is a phrase I often use with clients, which is that money doesn't create meaning, but it can help support the life that matters most for you. So money isn't the end goal. It's just designed for freedom, family, flexibility, generosity, peace of mind. So I think that starts with having a healthy relationship with money, viewing it in its proper place as a tool that helps support you in the life that you want to live. So a healthy relationship with money looks like aligning it with your values, not by living by comparison. right? So I talk a lot about that with clients where I go early on, I'll sometimes refer to it as your fiscalosophy, your philosophy about money, right? And it's a little cheesy, but I'll have people repeat that back to me and tell me a few stories over time as I build a relationship with somebody. I'll ask them tell me a story about that. Tell me a story about money. What was money like as a kid? What was money like as an adult? What was money like when you got your biggest paycheck? How did that make you feel? And some of that frames our interaction and our relationship that we have with money. And when we put it in its proper place, which in financial planning isn't at the center of the relationship, which is where most of our industry puts it. They put money in the middle and then they plan your life around it. And they tell you what kind of life you can have. And I like to flip that script to let's put your life in the middle and then let's plan your money around the life that you want to live. It puts money in its proper place, which is to support that lifestyle that you're looking for. But it's not necessarily to become the end all be all of what you're focused on. And so that's where we define it is really wealth span as it aligns with health is about financial endurance with purpose. So you can't separate the two. Again, I'll borrow a phrase my dad used to always say, which was that you need enough money to sleep at night and you need enough purpose to get out of bed in the morning. And that's where I think you find this intersection of wealth and health. But my concern usually when I'm sitting down with somebody entering into retirement or even somebody approaching and starting to think about a life transition, whatever that looks like, whether it's career or family or retirement, an aging parent, I think it's important to come back to what's your relationship with money. Because when we find ourselves off balance with our priorities, that's usually when we find the biggest issues, miscommunications, frustrations along the way.
Yeah, that's really the bedrock of habit building. To connect with your why is what we tell people. Connect with your why. Know what is your motivation? What is your purpose? I ask people, why do you want to get healthy? Is it because you want to be able to spend time with your kids and grandkids and do things with your friends? And I think it's the same thing. So many times we do not approach either health or wealth with intentionality. And then we wind up in a place where health or wealth are suffering because we've not made intentional choices. And so what would you advise someone, let's start with someone in their 30s or 40s. What choices and intentionality mindset would you advise people?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So daily habits are what really impact long-term financial outcomes. I mean, this is where repetition matters more than just occasional intensity. This is where good systems reduce your dependence on motivation. And just the automatic saving, regular review, living below your means, thoughtful decision-making start to add up. I'll often describe it as a lot of really boring execution of daily discipline, of doing what seems average, is actually what compounds into above average down the road. And the healthiest financial lives, just like I think the healthiest physical lives, often come through building recurring rhythms rather than bursts of effort at the end. And so the goal is to make good decisions easier and more automatic to do. And especially if you're somebody like myself with young children, that's pretty easy to grasp because you want to make things as automatic, as easy, and as thoughtless as possible and spend your energy on the things that really require your effort. So a few things that I'll encourage people when they're starting out is it's not too late. Habits can compound. Family and stress matter. Refocus your money around what your priorities are. But these things are built kind of one decision at a time. And so one of the biggest misconceptions that I run into on this concept of habits is sometimes people are waiting for the perfect time, right? I'm waiting for the perfect time to make that investment decision. I'm waiting for the perfect time. Maybe when we get that next raise, maybe when I get closer to retirement. And a lot of that is really just avoidance racked a different way. And so some of the tough parts about an advisor is really boiled down to being a good friend, right? Being able to say sometimes the harder things to hear in life, but also doing that with some empathy and with some authenticity. You have to have a relationship to actually do that. But I think back to those habits of common misperceptions are waiting for the perfect time. They're thinking that you have to do something dramatic rather than just making small choices every single day that move you forward, avoiding topics because they feel uncomfortable or because you may be embarrassed about a past decision, believing that just information alone can change your outcomes. Some people I've noticed in recent years are in a spiral of information, right? We're constantly inundated with information, but unless it translates to action, much like health, I know that sleep should be a priority, that I probably shouldn't look at a screen about 30 minutes to an hour before I go to bed, that, I should have a bedtime routine. And yet I know those things, but I don't always follow through on doing those things. And so that's where I think finance is often similar to health, is oftentimes we have a lot of knowledge that we don't translate into the daily habits of everyday life.
That is so interesting because I recently surveyed the people that are on my email list, and they said some of the exact same things. They said it was a health scare that got them started on a healthy journey, or they said, I haven't started yet. I'm still waiting for something to click. And oftentimes people chase the next shiny new thing. So
Yeah.
they're always starting a new program, starting a new diet, taking a new supplement, or even a new prescription. Do you think there's a parallel with that in the financial world as well?
Oh, absolutely. The avoidance is a decision too. And so frequently I encounter these moments where folks kind of get this paralysis by analysis. Some folks just constantly need new intake of information before they'll actually execute. And other folks just want to avoid the scenario that is right in front of them until unfortunately they're forced into making a decision long term. So, waiting for the perfect time is never going to be a good financial strategy, and not letting fear create paralysis. Some people often don't like to hear this, but occasionally I'll say, let's not confuse learning with doing, because those things are often, especially in a world where we're consistently inundated with the noise of information, we can sometimes become wrapped in chasing. I'll make a parallel financially and health wise here. We can be chasing that next digital scale out there that'll help me measure my weight, that next risk-based watch that'll help me measure something. And a lot of these things are good things. If you execute them well, they're really good things. But the next health plan, the next weight loss plan, the next diet plan, a lot of those things are easy to chase. Financially, it's the next tax loophole. It's the next security selection, instead of letting my portfolio that, maybe is carefully designed for my specific needs. It's the FOMO of I spend more time listening and thinking to the portfolios of what friends or family members or other people are doing around me who have different time frames, different risk tolerances, different investment objectives. And so a lot of those things we're busy chasing things that other people are doing or things that are marketed to us, rather than recognizing that usually executing the time-tested disciplines of health and wealth are usually better done through following a systematic plan than they are, chasing down the next shiny.
Absolutely. And, in your 30s and 40s, what you do for your health matters, but that doesn't mean you can't have sort of a reset in midlife. So if you've got someone that's more approaching retirement age, what do they need to think about as far as a perspective shift or maybe a mindset to approach those years?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think it becomes a lot more real as you encounter those areas. And one of those is guidance and accountability. On the health side, maybe an advocate, it may be a family member. In health, people want an advocate, a trusted guide, a primary care physician, a son or daughter, your spouse. On our side of the fence, it's more, what role does guidance like a financial advisor play in that? Guidance provides structure. It provides perspective, accountability, calm during uncertainty. And so as people are approaching major life events, in health, people want a trusted guide. In finance, people do too, to organize your complexity, to stay aligned with your long-term goals. A good guide helps people make clearer decisions with more confidence. And that's important, I think, both on the health side of having a plan, as well as it is on the wealth side of having a plan. Another one I would encourage people as they approach retirement is prevention versus reaction. A common phrase that I'll use with my clients is that in both health and finance, it's prevention is easier than repair. So it's easier for us to prepare than it is for us to have to repair later. And I think that's a huge parallel here. It's one of the strongest parallels to health is things like streaming and exercise, nutrition, moderation. Translate that into financial terms. And we're talking about saving, planning. We're talking about risk management, communication, tax awareness, having an updated estate plan, having a regular tax plan, reviewing your financial plan on a regular basis. Or in many cases, Vickie, it's being one of the Americans who actually has a plan. Most of the statistics on an annual basis show that fewer than 20% of Americans over age 55 have a written dollar-specific, date-specific financial plan. What we know that tells us is that folks are often unprepared, or at best, they don't know whether they're prepared or not. And so that's the key, is having a plan so that you can prevent and head off a lot of those potential risks down the road rather than fall subject to something that candidly is going to be a less than ideal scenario. Reactive behavior, in my experience, either in health or wealth, is usually more expensive emotionally and financially. So to the individual who wants to save some money and who wants to save some stress, I think getting an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as the phrase goes.
That is 100% true, but I don't want to skip over something that I think is important. You mentioned purpose, but what about joy? And a lot of people say that the love of money is the root of all evil. But in reality, being financially secure, knowing that you're not going to be a burden to other people, that you can make ends meet, that your wealth span will last for your lifespan. But in a lot of ways, money could bring you great joy.
Absolutely. I think there's a security that comes with that. That's the first level of feeling secure and feeling financially stable. I think there's also a translation to viewing money as less of I'm going to use a metaphor here, as less of a cul-de-sac and more of a conduit. Not a cul-de-sac that ends with me, but a conduit that's passed through to blessing other people. And people have different objectives. For some, that may be the grandparent that is able to help put a grandchild through college. For another, it may be supporting the charity that has become really important to them. For others, it's just helping their children in a way that really improves their lives. One of the things that I've encouraged some clients to consider is an older way of thinking was simply to accumulate assets through your life and then to use those assets as needed and then to pass them down towards beneficiaries at death. And that's a common and very traditional way of approaching wealth transfer. One of the things that I've encouraged clients to do who are charitable is to consider a lot of the very wonderful charitable giving options that you can use to invest and also give to charities, receive tax benefits, bless those charities, grow that giving over time. There's some excellent strategies that are out there that can really, really help enjoy that giving while you're alive and while you're able to enjoy it. Not just leaving a gift behind to a charity later at your death, but actually being able to participate in that experience while you're living. And for family members, it's, given concepts like inflation and the cost of college today, even just cost of living, a lot of family members may be looking at cases where mom, dad, grandma, and grandpa may have accumulated a lot of wealth in the last 25 and 30 years that maybe even in some cases they didn't expect given market returns. So now they're looking at a scenario where the sandwich generation in the middle, right? They may end up having to help care for parents and children at the same time. And so I've encouraged some clients, if they're in a situation where they're comfortable with that and they're comfortable with how their children are handling finances, maybe those children may benefit from using that money a little earlier in life rather than just leaving a huge amount to them when they pass away. And so that's one of those things that I've seen provide a lot of joy to people along the way is giving, the joy of giving, whatever that looks like, whether that's family, charities, their local community, that I think can create this conduit that money is, again, back to its rightful place as a tool to use in a way to live well and to also help others to live well. And arguably, I'll say that, that's the most fun for me to work on is watching families do well, retirements go well, people graduate from college, go on to do great jobs, charity supported. That brings us a lot of joy on our side of the fence too, because it's feeling like you're a part of something bigger. And I think that's important for individuals' health and wealth as they get into later in life too, is feeling like they are still engaged and a part of making the lives of everyone around them better as well as their own.
You're just hitting on all of the components of lifestyle medicine in a way, because one of them is social connections. And we have social connections with, people in our community that we can support. But then that core is those family connections. And I think that it's interesting that you talk about how that is so intertwined with health and wealth and family connections and having those hard conversations. So, I'm thinking about the person who's past retirement and now they're looking at expenses. Health is expensive. If you have health problems, it can be extraordinarily expensive. And that's where you may have to rely on family members. Is there a point where it becomes, so to say, too late?
That's a great question. Earlier is better. It's not too late. In a lot of cases, clients, unfortunately, are coming to us sometimes when it has already reached the point of where we're in a crisis. And so back to, some of my comments I'll often make about prevention versus reaction is that's always my preference. But in a lot of cases, we'll have clients come to us and bring a family member to the table, or maybe mom or dad, or usually it's when they're thrust into a role and there's a crisis that we have to try to solve. And most financial issues are not just math issues. They're usually people issues too. A lot of what we do is making sure that the financial problems are addressed not just in a technical way, but also in a relational way. So is it too late? No, earlier is always better, but later is still meaningful. In my experience in health and finance, a lot of positive changes still matter, even if they happen later than ideal. But people can still improve outcomes by changing their habits. I mean, I think the key is not just perfection, it's progress. So if you're somebody who thinks of yourself as an individual of filling a potential role in the future for a family member, and I think of this most in the terms of estate and trust planning. If somebody knows that in the future they're going to be the power of attorney for healthcare for a family member, one of the things that we encourage people a lot to do is usually things don't always go past the conversation of that initial document. And so, hey, sit down, talk, listen, learn while you have that opportunity and you're not in crisis. Learn more about how this person thinks about their health, what's important to them. What decisions do they make beyond just having HIPAA authorization to view their medical records? Actually get into their world and think about what's important to them. It helps you make those decisions in the future, not inside of a vacuum where you're lacking information. Usually we'll encourage, like a lot of things, free communication. Sit down with family members on the health side and the legal side and the financial side and get a download of information and updates and where the state of affairs lie for that family member in that moment can make a huge difference towards not having to execute in a crisis later. I think for the folks that do find themselves thrust into a circumstance of crisis, either personally or acting on the benefit of a family member, I think the best encouragement I could give is to ask for great advice and to seek great advice and to try to build a team-based approach. In my experience, that's a healthcare advocate, that's a financial advisor, that's a CPA, that's a great attorney on the estate side. Building a team of people that can support you is really huge. The best outcomes that I've seen for individuals that are thrust into a situation of having to execute in a crisis is usually solved through a lot of great teamwork.
It's like when someone's in the ICU, you consult every specialist. You want to get all the experts in there. And I saw a friend of mine yesterday, and she had surgery, and I was asking her about her surgery and everything. She said I had the most wonderful doctor because he listened. And he didn't just listen about symptoms. He listened to how this issue was affecting my life. And what I'm hearing you say is that in the financial world, it's important to do this same thing. It's important to listen. It's important to understand the story. And it's important for the patient or the client to be known. And when I retired from my practice because of a health issue, that was probably the highest compliment that I got when my receptionist called my patients to reschedule them. They said, "What am I going to do? She knows me." And so I think that in the financial world, that every bit is important. It's not just numbers. It's people and family and connections and stories that matter and purpose that matters and the possibilities of joy. This has been such good information.
You bet. I think a common thing that we'll say is that money isn't numbers on a spreadsheet. It's the story of your family. Every dollar earned, saved, or given defines this way of life, one that you are hoping will be preserved for generations. And that's quite an undertaking, and it's a heavy burden to bear on your own, but it is a worthwhile conversation to steward long term. That's ultimately what we're talking about, is that money doesn't create meaning, but it can help support the life that matters the most. And so the two are always intertwined.
It can also be an incredible act of selfless love. And I'm just thinking about my parents who were very, very, very middle class. And my dad worried so much to make sure that my mom would be taken care of. And he made decisions early in his life that really nobody else knew about to make sure that she was taken care of. And that was always his purpose, to make sure that my mom was taken care of. And now, in her 80s, that's become so critical. And it's such a blessing to us that he made decisions that made sure she was taken care of in these years.
No doubt. Those are family stories that are repeated, that are told, that are remembered, that are important. I love to hear those just because they have such an impact beyond dollar amounts. That's legacy. Legacy in our industry is so often assigned a dollar amount of what you're passing beyond. But I think there's something lost if you're not passing the values behind it and what came from that. My grandparents, none of the four of them went to college, and both of my parents grew up on farms, and they were able to put all of their children on both sides through college, and they were very proud of that. And yet I think there's a legacy that has always stuck with me through that of hard work that comes from that, family farm mentality of you work till the work is done, and you take pride in your work, and you try to do it the right way. And those are the types of things that stay with you, that it doesn't matter what career choice that you've taken. In our family, we've got teachers, we've got business people, we've got career military. So we've got a wide cross section of individuals. But when I look across them, there are a lot of people that no matter what their, path in life was, a lot of those values translate into the areas that they go. And I think that's important here too. When I look at now, for me, I have young children. So for me with young kids, I'm often thinking as I look at them, what values do I want them to have? And I think it's the values along with it that actually equips the person to be able to steward the money, to be able to manage the wealth, to be able to actually carry that into the next generation. And on the health side, that's important just as much.
Such a gift to be passed down. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I appreciate it very much.
Wow. Who knew there was so much overlap between the habits that you have in the health space and the habits that you build in the wealth space? And isn't Matt Buller fabulous? He is a financial advisor and managing director of investments with Benjamin F. Edwards in Champaign, Illinois. A second-generation advisor, he has over a decade of experience working with multi-generational families on investment and wealth planning. Matt holds a bachelor's degree from Olivet Nazarene University and has completed executive education through the American College of Financial Services and Yale University. He is a retirement management advisor and serves on the advisory council for Capital Group American Funds. Matt and his wife Haley live near Champaign, Illinois, with their 2 sons.
The information contained in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered to be a substitute for medical advice. You should continue to follow up with your physician or healthcare provider and take medication as prescribed. Though the information in this podcast is evidence-based, new research may develop and recommendations may change.